She's more than a talk show host, more than a billionaire. Today, Oprah Winfrey is one of the most powerful cultural voices on the planet. A woman whose presence can launch careers, heal trauma, and move millions to action with just a single sentence. She built an empire not by selling a product, but by being human. Radically, vulnerably, fearlessly human. And for millions of people who felt unseen, unheard, or unloved, Oprah became the mirror they never had. But to understand the full weight of her impact, you have to go back, far back, to where it all began. Not in a mansion, not in a studio, but in a tiny rural house in Mississippi, with a little girl who read the Bible aloud to herself, just to drown out the silence. Oprah Gail Winfrey was born on January 29, 1954, to a teenage mother who wasn't ready, and a father who wasn't there. Her first years were marked by poverty so extreme, she wore potato sacks as dresses when money ran out. She was raised by her grandmother, Hattie Mae, on a farm without running water. No toys, no books, no distractions, except the ones she created in her mind. At age 3, she was already speaking in full paragraphs. By age 5, she was delivering sermons to farm animals from the top of the front porch, mimicking the preachers she'd seen in church. There was a fire in her even then, not a hunger for fame, but for expression, for meaning, for voice. But life didn't reward her spark. Not yet. It tried to extinguish it. When Oprah was just 6 years old, her world shifted. She was sent to live with her mother in the North, in Milwaukee. What she found there wasn't safety or stability. It was chaos. In a tiny apartment with little supervision, Oprah experienced something that no child ever should. She was sexually abused by family members, beginning at age 9. Again and again. And she never told. Not then. Not until much later. The pain lived in her bones. But she didn't break. She carried it, silently, and poured herself into school, the only place where someone finally looked at her and said, "You're special." Her teachers didn't see a girl from poverty. They saw a girl with fire in her words. By the time she was 12, Oprah was reading everything she could get her hands on, from Shakespeare to Maya Angelou. Books became her escape, but also her proof that her life didn't have to stay small, that her voice one day might matter. At 13, she ran away from home. At 14, she gave birth to a premature baby boy who died shortly after. The world had every reason to write her off. But something in Oprah refused to be erased. After, Oprah was sent to live with her father, Vernon Winfrey, in Nashville. It was the first turning point, not of opportunity, but of order. Vernon was strict. He believed in discipline, education, and curfews. And for a girl who had never known stability, it felt like both punishment and salvation. He made her read a book each week, made her memorize speeches, and most importantly, made her feel like someone expected something from her. For the first time, Oprah had structure. She had rules. And deep inside those rules, she found a kind of freedom. Because now, someone believed she had a future. School became her stage. At East Nashville High School, she joined the speech team. And when she opened her mouth, something happened. People listened. Not just politely. Not just because they had to. They leaned in. She won oratorical contests. She dazzled judges. She earned a full scholarship to Tennessee State University, a historically black college. There, she studied communications. But Oprah didn't want to just talk. She wanted to say something real. At 17, she entered a local radio competition and won. That summer, she became the youngest and first black female anchor at Nashville's WLAC-TV. Still a teenager. Still in college, but already holding a microphone that would change everything. She was raw, unpolished, emotional. But there was something in her that couldn't be taught. Empathy. She didn't just report the news. She felt it, and that made her different. But not everyone appreciated that difference. When she moved to Baltimore in the late 70s for a job at WJZ-TV, she was mocked for her weight, for her hair, for crying too easily. One producer told her she was unfit for television. And just like that, she was demoted, stripped from the evening news, moved to a daytime talk show. People are talking, as a last resort. But that last resort would become her first revolution. Because daytime talk wasn't about perfection. It was about connection. And Oprah connected like no one else. She didn't perform. She shared. She didn't ask questions to fill time. She asked to understand. She leaned in, listened, reflected. And people, guests and audiences alike, felt something rare. Seen. What began as a fallback job in Baltimore became the spark that lit a national fire. Viewers loved her, not because she was glamorous, but because she was real. While other anchors polished their delivery, Oprah showed up as herself. Flawed, warm, curious, brave. Her ratings soared. And soon, opportunity came knocking from a much bigger city, Chicago. In 1983, Oprah moved to host a low-rated morning talk show called AM Chicago. It was a gamble, both for her and for the network. She was unknown. She looked nothing like the other hosts on TV. And she wasn't afraid to cry, or make you cry with her. But within months, the show went from the bottom of the ratings to number 1. Her secret? She wasn't trying to be a host. She was trying to be human, out loud. In 1986, that local show was renamed The Oprah Winfrey Show, and syndicated nationally. What followed wasn't just success. It was history. At just 32 years old, Oprah became the first black woman to host a nationally syndicated talk show in the United States. And she didn't stop there. In a landscape of shallow interviews and celebrity gossip, she brought depth. She talked about trauma, forgiveness, addiction, spirituality. She created space for people to speak truths they had buried for decades. She interviewed presidents, survivors, stars, everyday people. And she didn't just give them a platform. She gave them dignity. Behind the scenes, Oprah began building something even more powerful. Her own production company, Harpo Studios. She became one of the first black women in history to own and produce her own content on that scale. She wasn't just in front of the camera. She was running the entire machine behind it. And all the while, she was still showing up every day, giving millions of people a reason to believe in themselves again. But success never erased the scars. In fact, it brought them closer to the surface. Because no matter how many people watched, Oprah never forgot the little girl in Mississippi, wearing a potato sack, pretending it was a dress. That girl still lived inside her, and she made Oprah fierce. Fierce in her love. Fierce in her boundaries. Fierce in her belief that healing was possible. And just as she had found her way forward, she began helping others do the same. Through her angel network, through donations, through building schools, Oprah began shifting from host to healer. By the mid-1990s, Oprah Winfrey was a household name. Her show was the most watched daytime program in America. Her production company was thriving. She had wealth, influence, and global recognition. But inside, she was unraveling. The pressure to succeed, to hold space for everyone's pain, to carry the expectations of millions, it took its toll. Oprah began struggling with emotional eating. She called food her drug of choice. Her weight fluctuated publicly, and every tabloid was ready to shame her for it. She was exposed, raw, and endlessly criticized, not for failing others, but for being imperfect. She once said, "I was pretending to be fine, but inside I was screaming." And then came a professional low point. The movie Beloved. In 1998, Oprah poured her heart, her money, and her name into adapting Toni Morrison's novel into a film. It was personal. It was powerful. And when it premiered, it flopped at the box office. She was devastated. She had finally told a story that reflected the pain and history she had lived, and the world didn't show up. Oprah called it the deepest pain of her career. But it was also the beginning of a shift. Because in that heartbreak, she realized, success doesn't protect you from failure. And failure doesn't mean the story is over. That same year, she read A New Earth by Eckhart Tolle, a book that cracked something open inside her. It became a cornerstone of her spiritual transformation. She began focusing less on ratings and more on intention. She introduced Change Your Life TV, bringing thought leaders and spiritual teachers into mainstream media. She hosted episodes about trauma, shame, purpose, long before those words were part of the cultural conversation. Some viewers were confused. Others turned off their TVs. But Oprah stood firm. Because she wasn't chasing applause anymore. She was chasing alignment. In that season of transformation, one habit became her lifeline. Journaling gratitude. Every night, 5 things. No matter how bad the day, 5 things. It rewired her mind, recentered her spirit, and gave her something she could never buy: peace. That simple practice, done in silence, done in private, became her compass. Through every storm, she returned to that page. And in doing so, she learned something most people never do. You don't need to be everything for everyone. You just need to be fully yourself, and offer that as a gift. At the heart of Oprah Winfrey's transformation was one quiet, unwavering habit: radical self-honesty. She stopped pretending, stopped performing, and started showing up, fully, truthfully, soul first. This wasn't a branding strategy. It was survival. Because for someone who had spent decades holding space for others, she had forgotten to hold it for herself. She began meditating every day, sometimes for minutes, sometimes for hours. She called silence her new success. Not because it brought her more, but because it helped her feel enough. This shift wasn't just internal. It changed everything. She launched Super Soul Sunday, an Emmy-winning series where she sat down with spiritual teachers, scientists, and philosophers, and instead of asking about fame, she asked about meaning. No scripts, no surface talk, just depth. She created OWN, the Oprah Winfrey Network, a bold risk in an era when cable was declining. But for her, it wasn't about chasing trends. It was about building a platform for stories that matter. She partnered with Brené Brown, Deepak Chopra, Michelle Obama. She didn't compete with new voices. She elevated them. That's what set Oprah apart. She wasn't just the message. She became the megaphone for others. And behind the scenes, she kept giving. She opened the Oprah Winfrey Leadership Academy for girls in South Africa, a dream she held onto for years. She personally selected the students, read their essays, wrote letters to their families. Because for Oprah, success wasn't about leaving a legacy. It was about living it. She once said, "Your legacy is every life you touch." And by that measure, hers was already beyond measure. Her spiritual discipline, her emotional honesty, and her journal full of gratitude had built more than a media empire. They built a movement. One that told people, your story matters. Your pain matters. You matter. That was the real revolution. Today, Oprah Winfrey resides at the intersection of influence and introspection. Her current life reflects a deliberate shift from external validation toward internal alignment, a movement not only personal, but philosophical in scope. She lives primarily on her estate in Montecito, California, a tranquil environment conducive to her practices of meditation, reading, and intentional solitude. She continues to work, but on her own terms, choosing projects that resonate with her values, amplify underrepresented voices, or cultivate spiritual inquiry. From producing documentaries on trauma and mental health, to her ongoing work with Apple TV Plus and OWN, Oprah has transitioned from entertainer to educator, and, more precisely, from a public figure to a cultural institution. She remains unmarried, by choice, in a long-term partnership with Stedman Graham. Their relationship, spanning decades, is grounded in mutual respect and personal independence, a dynamic she has often described as essential to her ability to grow as an individual. Although she never had children of her own, Oprah has stated repeatedly that she feels a maternal responsibility toward the countless young women she's mentored and supported, particularly through her school in South Africa. In her words, those girls are her daughters in spirit. Her financial success is well documented, yet it is rarely the focal point of her narrative. What is more relevant, and instructive, is that she leveraged wealth as a tool for generational empowerment. From scholarship funds to disaster relief, from angel investing in female-led startups to funding mental health initiatives, her resources have become conduits for systemic impact. Yet, perhaps her most powerful legacy remains intangible. Oprah taught an entire generation that vulnerability is not weakness, it is access. That pain is not an endpoint, it is an opening. And that true power comes not from dominance, but from alignment with one's truth. To the viewer, her life offers a singular message. You do not need to be born into privilege to live with purpose. You do not need to be untouched by suffering to bring healing to others. You need only this: the willingness to face yourself, honestly, fully, without flinching, and to keep showing up anyway. Oprah Winfrey's story does not conclude with a studio or a stage. It continues wherever someone dares to speak their truth, even when their voice shakes. Because if a child from Mississippi, raised in poverty and silence, could rise to move the world with her words, then so can you.